One last topic I want to hit on today, the LGBTQ assault on America. Folks, I have to tell you, these are, when I talk about fundamental building blocks of America, some of them are really crystal clear things like rule of law, and you have to have, crimes spelled out ahead of time. You can't charge people with crimes that don't exist. And you have rule of law is a huge thing in America, and freedom of the press and freedom of speech and all these other things. But the LGBTQ agenda is at its core is an attack on the culture and fabric of America. I do not mean every single individual in this country who happens to be engaged in the LGBTQ lifestyle in their personal life. I do not mean that. I mean the agenda, the political, social agenda of the LGBTQ movement that is pushing to truly destroy the idea of freedom and freedom of religion in America. And let me just, and not just freedom of religion, but the first case I want to talk about involves freedom of religion. So there's a case, I believe it's coming up before the Supreme Court. It's going to be in front of the Supreme Court. It's a case involving a funeral home, Harris Funeral Home. This funeral home is so stellar, it actually won awards. Who knew funeral homes had competitions, but they've actually won awards for being a stellar, high-quality funeral home. They've always required their staff to dress appropriately. Men dress in suits and ties, women in skirts, whatever it is. And dress codes are allowed, by the way, by federal law. So Harris Funeral Home has had this dress code for years because, as everyone who's listening who's ever been through a family funeral, a funeral where you're really distraught, you just want professionalism around you. You want dignity. This is a setting where you want your client to be extremely comfortable. So Harris Funeral Homes had a policy basically as a dress code. Well, one of their male employees who'd been a funeral director for 4 years, I think it was, he came to them one day and said, I have decided that I'm transgender and I'm really a woman and I want to dress as a woman at work. And they said, sorry, but you're a guy and you need to dress like a guy. He's a man. He's biologically a man. So he filed a claim against them. So they told him he couldn't come to work dressed as a woman. He filed a claim. Naturally, our extremely biased and off track, federal EEOC office took his side. So as the case has moved forward, it is now going to be before the United States Supreme Court. The question of whether or not, and I will explain this, of whether or not Title VII, the federal anti-discrimination law that says you can't discriminate in employment based on race, gender, national origin. So race, sex, national origin is what it says, race, sex, national origin. So the ACLU naturally took this guy's case, this man's case, he's a man, but he wants to come to work dressed as a woman, and the argument that the ACLU is making to the Supreme Court is that when Congress back in 1964 passed a law saying you can't discriminate based on sex in employment, they really meant gender identity. That they really meant that you can't discriminate against transgenders. It's against someone who is male but thinks he's female or wants to be female, wants to become female, wants to dress as a woman, that was somehow what the Congress was trying to protect against. That's a reasonable interpretation of Title VII, can't discriminate based on sex. It's a reasonable argument that Congress really meant you can't tell someone who's a man you can't come dressed as a woman to work. Right? You can't come to work dressed as a woman. And I got to tell you, folks, this happens to be a funeral home employer, so it's got an added element, I think, of sensitivity, because the funeral home is saying, we don't want to have anything about what we present ourselves, anything about who we are, make people uncomfortable. And one of the most distraught days of their lives, we want just calm and order and normalcy. So that's their argument. They've had a dress code in place. No one argues that dress codes are illegal. They're just saying, and the ACLU is at the point of arguing at the Supreme Court that when Congress said you can't discriminate based on sex, they meant you can't discriminate against transgenders. So I want to just tell you, folks, when I was saying the start of this show, the kind of challenges we have facing this country, another big challenge is the completely unserious nature of the American left. Just unserious, ridiculous level arguments that we don't even have common sense anymore. He's a guy. If he wants to work at the funeral home and he's a guy, he has to dress like a guy. When he goes home, he can dress any way he wants. After hours, all weekend long, whatever it is, off hours, he can dress how he wants. He's trying to get the Supreme Court to say that because he woke up and decided he's a woman, everybody has to pretend he's a woman. I'm telling you, folks, the left is so unserious, cannot deal with facts, cannot deal with truth, cannot deal with reality. They're off in this crazy world where they're focusing on a guy dressed as a woman and his right to come to work dressed as a woman at a funeral home. And then in the similar ones, you'll hear about this whole LGBTQ assault on America. There was an article about this. In fact, what's her name? Penny Nance, I think it is. She's the head of Concerned Women of America. Talked about taking her son. She wrote about taking her son to college, to Virginia Tech. And, you know, you drop your kids off at college. Many of you have done this, or maybe you yourself remember this when you're being dropped off. But, you know, you have orientation day, you wander around, you get your name tag. It says, you know, Susie Q from Idaho, or whatever it says on it. So what Virginia Tech now has the person's name, and beneath it, your preferred pronouns. So that's what you have to put on your ID card. Like, I would say she, her, because I'm a woman and I want to be referred to as a she and a her. But they're so indulgent in this idiocy of pronouns. When I talk about how unserious the American left is, we're arguing about how some guy has to dress at his job at a funeral home. It's a matter of the Supreme Court's jurisprudence. Is ridiculous. It's equally ridiculous that at college campuses, and so we humor whatever it is, 0.03% of people who believe they're transgendered, and all of us have to put on he, she, him, her, and all sorts of things like that, and this article about Virginia Tech's orientation went on and on explaining all the different ways in which Virginia Tech was indulging this transgender agenda. And so we fight it in the public schools. We fight it. There's a case going back to the Supreme Court about a woman florist who didn't want to have to do flowers for a same-sex marriage, even though she's happy to sell flowers to anybody. But that case has to go back to the Supreme Court. We have a professor who lost his job at University of Louisville School of Medicine because he appeared on a panel talking about gender and not simply saluting to the radical left LGBTQ argument about gender and transgenderism. He questioned the transgender gospel. He lost his job. That guy is also suing. We'll be filing that case as well.